to this computer. So we are recording now. So this is the interview for the Director of Communications position with Scott Baughman, who is Neelix on the boards. Thank you, Scott, so much for being willing to come in tonight and talk about this position a little bit. I'm Maggie Geppert. I am the Executive Officer of the Continuing Committee. I'm Jadzia X8 on the boards, and this is Ross Fertel, faithful reader on the boards. Hi, Ross.
Hi, Ross.
So I'm gonna, Illinois is since I'm gonna be putting this on YouTube, Illinois is, Illinois is a consent to record state, so I'm just gonna go ahead and get everybody's consent to be recorded on this. So Scott, do you consent to be recorded for this interview?
I give my consent for recording. Thank you.
All right, Ross, do you consent to be recorded for this interview?
On the condition that a future movie adaptation involves my character saving kids from the orphanage, yes.
Okay. And I, of course, consent to be interviewed for this. So, Scott, thank you so much for coming on. We've got a few questions. I don't want to take more than an hour of your time. So I wanted to start just with some we've got a few general questions. And what do you think the role of the communications director is for the continuing committee?
So I think the best use of a communications director for a group like ours is to really just make sure that they fulfill the duties of a communications director to the best of their abilities in a way that gets the message out there to the people that are still playing our game after all these years, or any of our games. The big thing about communications, and that is what I do for a living, because I'm an editor of the newspaper and I have a degree in mass communication, is making sure not just to speak to people. It's not, a one-way street there. It's not a single mode of you just yelling out the message to people. You've also got to be able to listen. There's got to be a dialogue that happens. So for me, I think the best use of this position for a group like ours is to keep the players informed about any changes to the rules and the tournament structures, and then certainly keep the hype alive. I mean, it's so easy for us at this stage of our game's lifespan to get stuck in a rut, for everything to just be the same old. And I think a good director of communications makes sure that people know not only what's going on, but what's coming up, and why they should be excited about those upcoming things.
All right, thank you. I always write notes for these things, so if it takes me a second, I'm just finishing off some notes here.
No problem. You're talking to a guy who's been a reporter for 20 years. If you weren't taking notes, I'd be offended. Come on, Ross, skip with the program.
I try to teach my students the role of note taking in your real life and how important it actually is. And it's not just for class, guys. Taking notes is not just for class. Taking notes, taking notes in meetings has saved my bacon on more than one occasion.
Absolutely.
And so well, I told you to do this. And I'm like, I got in my notes, you said X, Y, Z. There was nothing about L. All right. So why do you want to hold this position?
So as we discussed when I was interviewing for the possibility of being director of second edition, the card game, all the Star Trek card games have a really big place in my life with all my friends growing up and plenty of friends that I have still today as an adult. And then, of course, here in the last decade, I've made some really great memories with my own children. Teaching them how to play the game, taking them to tournaments, spending time with them, doing deck designs and strategy and all of that stuff. And of course, at the heart of it, it's Star Trek. And I'm a huge Star Trek fan. And my skill set is one of getting the message out to people and then listening to their feedback. And so I think that when it comes to serving the committee to help keep the game that I love alive and to serve all of our games, being the communications director is a perfect fit for me. My namesake on the boards, Neelix, he was hired, if you will, as the morale officer for Voyager, but really he was also a lot about being their confidant and talking to people to help them work through their problems, and then also to acclimate to their new world. They're in the new quadrant for Voyager and her crew. And I think that a good director of communications helps bridge that gap between sometimes, the committee members themselves or the particular volunteer coordinators, and then players that sometimes feel they've been left out in the cold when it comes to getting information about the decision-making process and what's been happening with the committee itself. And so I sort of take inspiration from the way Neelix was that bridge between worlds, and that's why I want to be a director of communications, is to help patch together and clear up some of the miscommunication, honestly, that has happened over the years. And with a position like this and a committee like ours, it's sometimes hard for everyone to get on the same page, either virtually or physically, to know what's happening. And I think that I have the skills I need to help solve that issue, as it were, or at the very least, to help shore up the efforts that have been done in the recent years.
Okay. So then, as a board member, the director of communications is subject to a vote of no confidence during the period of review. Are you willing to subject yourself to the period of review?
Oh, certainly. I mean, in the mass communication world, in the newspaper world where I work, just about any social media type stuff these days, aren't we all somewhat subjected to a period of review when it comes to Twitter and Facebook, YouTube, and those sorts of things? As some of you know, I also do a Star Wars podcast, so we get plenty of feedback from people. And of course, I've had innumerable employee reviews over the decades that I've worked in the publication field. And so I absolutely have no problem doing the period of review. And, if there's something that I'm doing incorrectly or things that people think I need to do better, I am open to receiving that feedback. Like I said earlier, communication is a two-way thing. It can't just be me sitting there with a metaphorical bullhorn yammering on. But also, if I do things well, I hope the period of review is a time when people take the moment to say, hey, Scott, great job on this particular project.
All right. So I think you've actually kind of covered this one. The next question is, tell us why you think the director of communications role is so important in the CC. And I see that those sorts of answers already in some of your other ones. So I'm going to go ahead and,
Sure.
Unless you have anything extra you want to add to that.
No, I think I covered that pretty well. It's really important at this stage in the lifespan of our games to get the messages out there and then receive that feedback in a timely manner.
All right. So how do you think the CC is doing at retaining players, promoting the game, and dealing with problem players?
So when it comes to retaining players, I think we're doing an okay job right now. Of course, at this moment in time, here in June of 2020, with the COVID-19 going on, retaining players has become quite a bit of an issue unless those players are able to play virtually, or they live in an area where they can at least gather together because they're close enough to meet at someone's house or whatnot. Here in North Carolina, our game stores are not open for public gaming spaces yet. And depending on how the number of cases go, they won't be open for quite some time. So retaining players has become, gosh, almost a Herculean task for us right now. But I think overall, I'm going to say the past 5 years, the committee has done a pretty good job of retaining players, except for a few particular instances that we all are aware of, where large groups of players were totally disenfranchised after various kerfuffles had occurred. I'm not going to dive into all of that, but I think a strong communications director can help to prevent or at least soften the blow of situations like that going forward. I would love to say that a good communications director can prevent those situations entirely, but that might be a little naive. Real life happens, things occur, but the point is getting the message out there in a timely and concise manner can really help to calm emotional reactions to help retain players that may have ordinarily thrown up their hands and said, hey, they're not even telling us what really happened. I don't have time for this in my life anymore, and I'm out. As far as marketing the game and reaching out to new players, I think we do an excellent job of that. Hardcore work from volunteers like Eric Robinette, who made this awesome T-shirt that I'm wearing for Continentals last year in Georgia, make it where you have really eye-catching stuff to grab the attention of people who are perhaps more casual Star Trek fans of the old school genre, or maybe they're a little more casual gaming fans of old school card games, or they're interested in a card game that has this pedigree that ours has. One thing that we do a good job of on Facebook and other places is promoting the images, the iconography, and the work of an old school design of card games that definitely has that 1990s turn of the century feel. So we tap into that nostalgia, but we do it in a way where our message is promoted in a modern and contemporary format. So I think that we have really good ways to reach out to potential new players that maybe have played card games before, or they've played a Star Trek game before, but they haven't tried any of our particular games. And with these newer cards that we do, our virtual cards, and especially our most recent versions or generations of virtual cards are very eye-catching. And so I think that we've done a good job of using social media and the visual nature of what we do to reach out to those folks.
Yeah, I was laughing. I was giving a lecture the other day, and I was wearing the hazardous materials shirt, and I sort of stood up to go grab something off the counter, and one of my students goes, "Is that a magic card on your shirt?"
Yep.
And I'm like, actually no, but here's the website. I'll give you a demo when you're not my student anymore.
Right.
All right, let's see. Do you think that the current way of communication with players is working? If so, how? If not, how would you improve it?
So basically a two-part question gets a two-part answer from me. I think it's working in some ways, but it needs improvement in other ways. The way that it's really working well, like I said, is our social media engagement with those graphical posts about virtual cards or even errata cards and what have you. That gets people's attention. And that's 90% of a director of communications job when it comes to outward reaching statements or outward reaching posts, is to make people stop scrolling through whatever feed they're on and actually pay attention to what we've done or what we've changed in the card games. One way that our communications approach isn't necessarily working is sometimes long-term players feel very much left out in the cold as to what has been made in the way of decisions and often why those decisions were made. Now, I don't believe that every decision the committee members make needs to be explained to the public. Sometimes people just have to realize these people are in these positions of authority for a reason. They've made their decision and we'll stick with it, and we can address it during the period of review if we feel strongly enough about it. I think a way to really improve that is to have a more regular disbursement of information about what is happening at various points in the committee, whether it be card design, rules review, event planning, whatever particular aspect of the committee is being active at that moment in time, and put it out on a regular basis at places not just on the message boards. Unfortunately, for better or worse, the message boards aren't frequented by as many players as they once were. Now, a portion of that is people that have become fed up with the atmosphere at the message boards, but an even greater percentage of that is due to the fact that message boards as a system have become somewhat outmoded in the internet world here in 2020. Things like Discord, and of course Twitter and Facebook, and occasionally Instagram are much more active places. But I think that a strong director of communication would be able to leverage a few more of those platforms and do so on a more regular publication schedule, if you will, of getting that message out there as to what the particular different committees and subgroups are doing. I know from personal experience, working with the committee so far as a volunteer, because over the years, for those who don't know, I've been an ambassador, tournament director, tournament organizer, play tester, member of the writing team many years ago. And recently, I went to go log on to the playtest boards to check on the newest set of 2E cards and found that I no longer have access to the playtest boards. And I checked with my playtest lead, who, as you all know, Nathan Miracle, and he said that he wasn't quite sure why I didn't have that access anymore, but that there had been an idea afoot of reducing the number of roles that each individual had in the committee. And so if I was going to be an ambassador, or I could be a playtester, that maybe I shouldn't be both, which I can see some wisdom in that. But I have yet to hear any particular definitive response about why that decision was made.
I'm a little confused by that, actually, because we need more playtesters, and I assume I assume since you all haven't, like, there hasn't been a playtest report recently, maybe Nick said, well, maybe these guys don't want to be playtesters anymore.
Maybe so, and that would be fine. I can understand that, but to make my point about communication, if that were the case, no one has told me. So.
I see. Yes. Well, we certainly need more. We certainly need all the playtesters we can get. So,
oh, absolutely.
Yeah. I don't know if you've heard or not. Ben Liebig is the new playtest manager for 2E. So, if you want to continue to playtest, send him a PM, and he can get you back He can get you back on the board.
Cool. I will do that after we are done here tonight.
All right.
And I hope that if we do decide to implement this idea that people really only serve in one particular role, that I could get a little bit of a leeway on joining back with the writing team. Ross, as you recall, I really enjoyed working on writing those articles. So, that would be great, because, writing is pretty much what I do. So I think one of the most enjoyable ones I did over the years was a few years ago when Charlie had set up a system of talking about your particular memories of specific first edition expansion sets. And we were going through each of them at the same order in which they released. And I wrote a really cool memory that I had about first discovering the First Contact set for first edition and how much the game had changed. Basically, I said, it was pre-First Contact or post-First Contact when it comes to 1E. That's basically the watershed moment of that game. It absolutely changed the way the game was played, and in my opinion, for the better. I know some people feel like old school 1E Premier Ultra Universe Q Continuum was much better, but I enjoyed branching out into the other Star Trek properties and changing the deck composition rules. But anyway, that's the kind of thing I'd like to write more about.
All right. I'd like to do more. Okay. And I don't see how, like, a director of communications couldn't also write cool articles about cards and sets and fun stuff
yes.
like that. That would seem odd not to have you in doing articles like that.
Excellent.
All right. So what are some projects or initiatives you have in mind for your new role as Director of Communications?
Well, as I mentioned previously, of course, I'd love to write more articles about the history of the game and then moving forward. But also, I would love to essentially set up basically a weekly or twice week, a bi-weekly newsletter, as it were, to sort of give an update as to what each individual committee or subcommittee or subgroup is working on, and post that not only on our site on the boards, but probably over on the Reddit section for the game. Of course, into the Discord for the dojo and the official continuing committee Discord, and then certainly on Twitter and Facebook and possibly even Instagram, although Instagram's not super friendly for text posts like that. I think the another thing that I would like to see done is to set up a place that's almost like an ask me anything every so often to schedule for people to come and post their questions for the director of communication. And in a situation where if I don't know the answer, I at least can know who to ask. I think that's sort of, again, it's got to be two-way. And so I believe setting up some more two-way initiatives is really important. And this is not to say that we necessarily have a director of communication in the past that has done that poorly. Just maybe that we need to take what has been done and build more upon it.
Right. So how would you utilize each member of your communications team? So that's the writing team manager, the social media manager, the proofreading team leader, and the chief ambassador.
So I think the best way to utilize all of those folks is to get with them individually and find out why it is that they do that job, what it is about that job that stirs their passion, and then lean very hard into that. So, for example, the person who's in charge of proofreading, that's great. As an editor of a newspaper, I wish I could have a person whose job was to proofread. It pretty much falls to me, and then I turn around and yell at the reporters about how could you possibly write this sentence and think it qualifies as English? Anyway, but I think what I would do is to lean into the person who does proofreading, to let them, be very much in charge of proofreading the stuff that is pre-scheduled to be posted. Posting on social media is often viewed as extemporaneous, but luckily in our committee, we are not under as a huge time crunch very often, so that we can preset things. And that gives us the time to refine them and make those posts be the best they possibly can be. So just as one example, I would interweave that social media person with the proofreading person to make sure that each of them is getting to do the thing that they feel passionate about. There shouldn't be anyone involved in our committee at this point in the game's lifespan that isn't super intensely passionate about the hobby, because the people that aren't have already fallen by the wayside. All of us on this call tonight have played the game forever, and it's because we really, really love it. And I think the same would be said of why we're involved in the continuing committee. So that is how I would definitely utilize those individuals, especially when it comes to the writing team. And then whoever becomes the chief ambassador in the future certainly would be useful to also have them help disseminate information to the individual ambassadors in their own certain regions. So, that's a huge, almost, back channel of communication that can sometimes be a lot more efficient than just posting a thing on Facebook or Twitter, because the players in their local area are more likely to listen to their ambassador when he has something to say, because the best communication is personal communication. And hopefully all of the individual ambassadors out there have, very good personal relationships with their own players.
Excellent, thank you. Yeah, just to as a reference, by the way, the proofreading team at this point in time only does proofreading for sets. Mm-hmm. And like promos and stuff before, so they don't ever see any of the articles, which is actually something I think that if we can get the interest, because the head of the head of proofreading is Michael Moskop, mm-hmm. who has a degree in rhetoric. So
excellent.
So he is our current proofreading lead, and I would bet that he would be, I don't know, he has little ones. They're sort of new, and
yes.
So he hasn't been as active lately. I remember that from 2010. 2010 is my lost year. That was when my son was born, so I'm totally there with him. But he right. I would bet that he wouldn't. He might be interested in thinking about doing a little more proofing of articles and things like that.
Yeah, and I think that would be great. And like I said, it's kind of like when you're the blacksmith and you're banging that blade together. You want as many hammers as you can to beat on that article to get it to sterling shape. So I'm aware that they do mostly proofreading of cards, but I think one thing we could do is leverage them to do more.
Right. How would you work with our social media manager and ambassador core to promote or encourage new players?
So I think one of the best ways we can promote and encourage new players is to possibly have some alternate art cards that are only available in a specific way. And then we use a series of posts on social media or even updates released through the different ambassadors that sort of almost like a virtual scavenger hunt lead those new players to an access code or a hidden web page, if you will, for that alternate art card that not only looks cool, but is also useful, but yet also simplistic enough that new players would be able to easily access and use it in the game. For a second edition example, our one of our more recent Captain Picard promos, who has excellent skills, and all his game text does is allow you to download the Enterprise D. This is a great card, but it was set up, costed perfectly well to where it's not incredibly broken, but it's super easy for newer players to understand. And it's got a cool image already, but because Picard is so popular right now, I think having yet another almost new player friendly card that has him on it as a different promo, but you can only get it by following us and checking in with us and whatnot on social media, would be a great way to leverage those two particular volunteers to get more engagement from potential new players or even players that have just begun to explore our game. I think we can do a lot of posts that involve engagement in that way to have people go ahead and click through to an article. You know, in my day job, we have many of our articles behind a paywall on our website, but we have to get very creative with where to break the article to make people actually want to click through so they can go ahead and finish reading the story. So I'd like to leverage that kind of experience into the way that we do social media and then the way that we work with the ambassadors. We could even do some sort of combination of releasing those clues where some are on social media, but some you have to get by interacting with your local ambassador. And of course, it doesn't have to be promo cards. You know, we could do the same process for perhaps not new players, perhaps veteran players, when it comes to releasing spoilers or previews of upcoming card sets.
Oh, very cool. Very cool. All right. COVID-19 has caused a resurgence of nostalgia for STCCG. How would you keep that nostalgia alive?
I think our biggest stick to use for keeping that nostalgia alive is the fact that when you find someone who is all, oh man, I used to play this game back in the 1990s. It was really cool. You just hit them with, and it's still really cool because guess what? We still make cards. This game is still alive. And you don't have to spend a fortune on gathering up all the cards to play with your friends and family again, because here's our website where you can print them out for free. And I think that is just like phenomenal. To us, it's all old hat because we've been so used to printing out cards for years now. But I have friends who, like you said, Maggie, during the pandemic, have rediscovered old school card games, Star Trek among them. And I've been able to tell them on Facebook, hey, actually, the game never stopped. We'd love for you to come back. And, you know, I just post links to the CC's homepage. I think a big way that we can really tap into that nostalgia vibe is to go ahead and set up a section on the homepage or set up a specific landing page within our website architecture that we can link to whenever we see somebody talking about that nostalgia. And that landing page would, of course, be a variation of the welcome back returning players, but with a particular bent with a paragraph or so to introduce it from that lens of nostalgia about, you know, remember how cool it was to overcome that Borg cube dilemma? Well, now you can play as the Borg, and here's all these cool new virtual cards that involve the Borg as their own playable affiliation, et cetera, et cetera.
All right, thank you. There, there is a push to increase articles and cards of the day. How do you think this can be accomplished when we have a limited number of volunteers at this time?
So I think the best way to do this is to produce some sort of reward for those who contribute to Card of the Day or writing articles. Again, I would love to see possibly some exclusive promos of cards with alternate images that you can earn by writing a certain number of pieces of content. Or alternatively, if we don't want to do that, perhaps something like a particular unique pin or badge that can be applied to your message board ID. Or if we could coordinate with TK and the guys at the dojo, we could make it where you get a specific Discord emoji reward when you become a writer, and then you can sort of rank up your number of articles. We do have this already to a certain extent, where you can earn badges and what have you on the message boards for writing a certain number of articles or even tournament reports. But I think that we should expand upon that to sort of breathe new life into it. A lot of the people that were interested in earning those things have earned them a long time ago, and they've sort of reached the pinnacle of that, progression. I think that if we were to create a few new individual virtual rewards, then that would reignite that fire for people in some way. I think another way that the director of communication could help out with inspiring people to write again is to look back through the archives and find those who once were very passionate about writing, see if they're still playing the game, and suggest to them that they do a retrospective or a follow-up piece based on something they wrote years ago. Or even, I mean, for a lot of those articles, it's time to update them. It's time to talk about how the game has changed, in the intervening years. And information that was once groundbreaking and amazing is outdated. So I think that if we took the time to maybe reach out to those authors, or if those authors are no longer around, talk to people who are interested in updating it and say, hey, look, here's a great topic that would be very timely, of looking at how is the Dominion different than it was when it was first released in Call to Arms all those years ago for second edition, or in the Dominion for first edition, and so forth.
That's an awesome idea. All right. What is your experience with streaming video, and how would you use it in your new role?
So I don't do a lot of streaming video, but I have been on the producing side and the hosting side of 3 different podcasts, which is a very similar concept to streaming. So I think the easiest way for me to parlay that experience into streaming is just simply go ahead and record the video as well as the audio. Be able to speak off the cuff and expound upon a topic extemporaneously is something that I have lots of experience doing, not only in the podcasting here in the hobby and nerd world, but also I have been able to do that as host of various award shows and whatnot in my day job. And of course, you have to think on your feet when you get to interview the mayor of Charlotte or the Reverend Jesse Jackson, and know what to ask them based on what they just said to you. So that is a skill that I believe applies very easily to streaming. And so what I would use that to do is to, take some of that written content that I was talking about and adapt it to video every so often. Again, it's important for it to be on a regular and recurring basis so that players and volunteers alike can know when to expect to get more information.
Did you really interview the Reverend Jesse Jackson?
I did. Now, I wish I could tell you that my chance to interview him was because of a good thing, but it was not, because as is often the case in our industry, it's because of bad things. Many years ago in the town of Gaffney, South Carolina, where I lived at the time, 2 young Black men were lynched in our town. And the Reverend Jackson and several members of the NAACP came to speak. And so I covered it for our local newspaper and did get a chance to talk to him. Unfortunately, it was a chance to talk to him about the history of race relations in our country and how horrible it was that these young men were attacked outside the high school.
Oh,
Now,
yeah,
on
you're
a
right. That's awesome. That's pretty awful.
Yes, but on a positive note, the perpetrators were brought to justice, and they are in prison. So,
well, that's good. That's good at least. That was a we were listening to NPR the other day, and they were talking about the bridge in Selma that the March on Washington started on, and how that had been a place of lynchings. And that was my son was like, "Mom, what's a lynching?" And I'm like, "Oh, we're going to have a difficult conversation for dinner."
Yes,
And
but
I went ahead and did it, but woo.
yeah. Well, good for
So,
you for educating him, but also, isn't it nice to know that he has yet lived in a world where he doesn't know what that is?
yes.
So it is my hope that someday that becomes an artifact.
Right. Okay, this one, can we get a thumbnail sketch? This next one, what is your experience dealing with news media, and have you ever promoted anything on television or in print? And I feel like that's almost redundant given the things you've already said.
Do you want? I mean, are we talking about today or ever? Because I mean, I have a pretty good number of things from earlier today.
Well, I'm just going to put in for the record that you're an editor of a newspaper. You may have done this a minute.
Yeah, so I'm just going to twist the camera slightly, and you can see the Press Association Awards hanging behind me.
Oh, cool.
I feel like I'm bragging now, so I'm going to stop. But yes, I have awards behind me for both news writing and photography. And then, of course, you can't be in the news industry these days without being able to self-promote. So I also do our 50 Most Influential Women of Charlotte Awards every year. This year will be the 12th year that we have done 50 Most Influential Women of Charlotte. And we have local celebrities as well as local business owners and healthcare professionals and so on and so forth that are all involved in those awards every year. And we get plenty of attention nationwide for those winners.
Awesome, thank you. Let's see. I think you've really kind of touched on some of these other ones. So I'll ask you some of the other. What's your favorite affiliation and deck type in 1E and 2E or 2E?
So in first edition, my favorite deck type is one that utilizes a variety of reporting methods that can all easily overlap with each other on the space line. For many years now, 1E has been about almost that soup of particular report mechanisms. And we've had new cards come out that try to encourage people to stick to specific subsets of affiliations, KCA, D Space Nine, et cetera, et cetera. One of my favorite things that we did as a committee when it comes to first edition, is doing the Next Generation set many years ago, where we retroactively added a cool little Next Generation comm badge icon to many of the 1E cards, and then printed new ones that had the icon on it. And I loved the idea of playing one of those Warp Core or Reactor Core cards to start out the game. It's very reminiscent of the old Star Wars CCG with its objectives that started with certain things in play. So my favorite deck type is one that plays off that idea, but has a couple free engines added onto it, but it's not set up to where you have to play these people at this planet for free and these people at this facility for free. I like being able to play them all geographically, if you will, or astrometrically in the same place. So that way I don't have to spend turns going around playing Space Uber with my guys in 1E and picking them all up. When it comes to second edition, what I'd like to do is play, honestly, my favorite affiliation is the original series group. Star Trek, the original series, is my favorite Star Trek of all time. I am always of the opinion that if that show wasn't so great, we wouldn't have all the others. And so therefore, I like playing the TOS crew because of the player agency that's involved in that group. Because when you play Kirk or Spock or McCoy in second edition, it's up to you how much of your counters you want to spend on them if you want to do their upgrade effect or not. I like having runtime or playtime decisions be much more important than particular deck archetype or deck construction decisions were ahead of the game. Those are all, of course, very important, but I really much enjoy that that seat of the pants, versatility in the moment stuff. And I feel that captures the atmosphere of the original series so well also.
Excellent, thank you. This is one of my favorite questions. This is courtesy Ross. He turned me on to this awesome question. What is your favorite unpopular Star Trek episode and why?
My favorite unpopular Star Trek episode, and why do I like it?
If you want
Gosh.
to, if you want an example, my answer to this question is Manhunt.
Okay. Okay.
That's the one where Loxana gets all weird and hormonal and goes off looking for a husband.
Right. Yes.
And I love it because it's totally goofy, but also it's Loxana at her very most, I don't give an F what you think, Loxana-ness. And I hope that when I am an old lady, I'm gonna be like I'm gonna do whatever I want as
That's
Loxana
right.
Troy. So
Yeah.
that's my example of that. So if I don't know if that helps you or not.
Well, I don't know how necessarily unpopular this one is, but I also know that not a lot of people jump on it as, one of the ones they name often as they're on their list of this or that. But Let That Be Your Last Battlefield from the original series, where Frank Gorshin portrays a guy who's white on one half of his body and black on the other, and then his opponent is the opposite arrangement. Of course, it being the 1960s, that was an excellent example on race relations. But for me, I really love it because you get to see Frank Gorshin do a cool alien that Kirk and them are just so far removed from that particular mindset that it's almost impossible for them to grasp what is happening throughout most of the episode until they finally get it at the end, and Spock basically explains how they're already lost. And like all good original series episodes, it teaches us, the viewer, a valuable lesson about how things that we think are enormous differences really aren't.
All right, thank you. I think I know the answer to this one, but I'll ask anyway. What character from all of Star Trek do you see yourself most resembling?
Oh, I want it to be Captain Kirk, but we all know that it's Neelix. So much so that recently I have gotten my own backyard wood-fired pizza oven. So I'm out there, chopping up tava root or what have you, and putting it on pizzas and baking the dough right in front of everybody, in the actual fire. And I'm people who know me on the boards, and especially on Discord, I talk a lot about smoking meats in my Weber Smoky Mountain cooker. And of course, I am a barbecue connoisseur because I'm a good Carolina boy. The best sauce is mustard sauce, and anyone who tells you differently is a liar. Which is
Excellent.
probably one of the most Neelix things I could say. Like, this is delicious. Believe me.
It's
Well,
literally hair, Neelix. It's literally hair.
It's not about the hair, Ross. It's about the seasoning you put on the hair.
I was, for a second, I thought you were doing a Riker reference with the pizza oven, and I'm like, oh yeah, Neelix is the cook.
That is true. That is true. Yeah, I enjoyed that scene in Picard where Riker is calling Red Alert for the burnt tomato. That was amazing.
All right, just a couple more questions, and we'll go ahead and wrap it up. How are you planning that? So we have a few specific for you. How are you planning to increase your presence on the forums, since right now you only come to us about once a week, according to your application?
Yeah, so I would definitely be increasing my presence because I'd want to promote the articles that people are turning in and, like I said, give those regular updates. Essentially, I would do what I do with all of my deadlines on a regular basis. These days, I have my iPhone set to ding and remind me, hey, this is the time to turn this thing in. So it would basically just be a case of, ding, ding, it's time to go post on the forum, or at the very least, peruse the forums and see what's up. And the same to be said, of course, of Discord. I think we really need to branch out there more so in an official capacity. Although, Ross, you're on the dojo more often than I am. So well done, sir.
Thank you.
Let's see. Your play group is known as one of the friendliest groups in Trek. How would you deal with a player that came into that environment and changed the way people felt about the group?
I think that the biggest thing that makes Team 42, which was our team name back in the day, known as such a friendly group, is because we are open and welcoming. If we had a new player who was maybe a little more competitive or a little more hardcore about things, I mean, we would all adjust in the way that we have over the years when we gain new players for other games beyond Star Trek. We've had our fair share of disagreements amongst team members and group members. And of course, years and years ago, when our group first began mingling with the group in Georgia, many of you know Greg Hodgin from that group can be, shall we say, stringent when it comes to particular rules, interactions, and play styles. And we just monitored and adjust to deal with someone who reacts in that way. And I never want our group or any group that I'm associated with to be one where a person feels unduly cast out or excised from the group. I am a multiple strikes kind of guy. Just because you have, a harsher form of language or you're more serious about your play style doesn't mean that I'm going to change the way that we interact with you on a grand scale. I'll get real personal here. Maggie, you had a not so great interaction with one of our players at Continentals last year when Dustin got pretty bent out of shape during one of your games. But after a while, everybody calmed down and we talked to each other the next day and we worked it out. That's how we do things in our group. We got to communicate, if you'll pardon the pun. And I think that's the key for any group that would want to have new members come in. Be aware that yes, you're going to help that new player become better at the game, but also that new player has their own personality and they may change the atmosphere of the group for a bit, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. Everybody needs to grow and change. The key is if we work together and talk to each other about what's changing and make sure that things are changing in the manner that we all want them to. And I think a certain level of maturity is to be expected amongst Star Trek players at this stage in the game. And the way that you and Dustin just worked it out the next day is a perfect example of how our play group deals with that kind of thing.
I had completely forgotten about that.
And that's my point.
Yeah. I don't even remember what the blow up was about. I think I don't even know.
So there was a bit of a timing dispute about consume dilemmas, and Neil came over to try and elaborate, but Dustin didn't take it the right way because sometimes Dustin reacts in that way.
Oh, that's right.
And he basically was like, "I'm going to concede and head out," and so he quit for the rest of the evening. Not that it wasn't already pretty late, but it was a Star Trek gathering, so we're going to play cards all night long.
Yeah.
But yeah,
pretend like we're 20 again.
Exactly. Yes. But he, like I said, he got over it, and the next day you guys talked to each other. It was no problem, and that is the kind of communication that I want to foster amongst members of my group, be they old time like Dustin or whoever new players might be. The same thing's true when he began and Big Mike and those other guys began to interact with my children when they came of age and started coming and hanging out with us. People have to sometimes adjust in the way that they interact when kids are around, and so not everybody was super excited about that at first because they want to be able to cut loose and hang out and whatnot. But we reached a sort of median point to where everybody felt relaxed and had a good time. But we may not have been as ribald and risque as we were if the children weren't there, which in the grand scheme of things might be a good thing for those of us that are hanging out. It's time for us to mature, right?
Right. And I always love to hear like a word, and that's you use the word ribald, and in my head, I think I've never actually heard anybody use that word in spoken context. I've read it plenty of times in books and always pronounced it in my head as ribald.
Well, perhaps you're correct. I may have said it wrong, or I'll just claim my Carolina accent, and we'll leave it at that.
All right, one last question, and I think that covers it. This was. Wanted to tell us about the weakest periodical you have produced.
The weakest periodical that I have produced. I feel attacked. No. So perhaps the weakest periodical that I've ever produced was, again, I'll go back to when I was living in Gaffney. I worked for the Gaffney Ledger, which is a 3 times a week paper in South Carolina. For those of you who don't know, Gaffney is the town city that was made famous by House of Cards because Kevin Spacey's character on that Netflix drama was a senator from South Carolina from Gaffney. It was the town with the big peach-shaped water tower that they often showed in House of Cards. Anyway, because, spoiler alert, South Carolina actually produces more peaches than Georgia. But the weakest publication I've ever produced, periodical I've ever produced, was we had a paper that was not part of our regular rotation, and it came out every Wednesday, and it was called the Weekly Ledger. Now, the Gaffney Ledger was a subscription model newspaper, so we all worked really hard to make sure that it was the best it could be to keep people to continue subscribing to it. The Weekly Ledger was mailed out to every particular mailbox in our county. Whether people subscribed to it or not, it was free. And sometimes, I must admit, when it was my turn to write an article for the Weekly Ledger, I turned in the most boring, dreadful dreck because it's free. Nobody's having to pay for it. Why would I put that much effort into it? Once I even turned in an article that was a recap of 2 cosplayers from our town and what they had done at DragonCon that year. Now, that to us, that sounds like an awesome article, but nobody wants to read about DragonCon on the front page of a purported news publication. Needless to say, the other people that also produced the Weekly Ledger didn't spend a whole lot of time proofreading or editing it, so nobody really batted an eye when I turned in that picture and article of stuff from DragonCon, which was contributed for the most part by those 2 particular individuals that had gone to Atlanta. But a few weeks later, I assure you, we got several letters to the editor about how this was total nonsense, or even more choice statements from small town South Carolina about DragonCon, if you catch my meaning, and I'm sure you do.
Yes, and those scandalous city folk.
Yes.
Doing scandalous things like dressing up in costumes.
Exactly. Those weirdos who probably play those evil games like Dungeons and Dragons. Anyway, but yeah, that was definitely the weakest periodical I've produced, and almost got fired over that, but thankfully I did not.
All right, well, thank you, Scott. Do you have any questions for us?
I guess my next question for you is, do you have an idea on a time frame for when a decision will be made? And also, can you tell me how many other people have applied? When I did second edition director application, I knew how many people were in the field.
All right, we have 3 applicants altogether, and we have 1 more interview tomorrow midday. So I'm hoping to meet with the team and at least to discuss our choices before Sunday, because Sunday is the board meeting, is the June board meeting. So I'm hoping to actually put forth a name for approval at the Sunday board meeting.
Okay, great.
Okay.
Ross, did you want to ask anything, bud?
No, the question that I put in was already asked. So if you're satisfied with the interview, so am I.
Awesome.
All right, well then I'm going to end the recording here.